Hi everybody, it's John back with another model inbox review. Today we're looking at a project which involves not just one plane but two, because we're actually looking at an Airfix Dogfight double, and this should give you a pretty good idea which Dogfight double it is, because the picture image of a Spitfire that you've got in front of you is actually a Mark 9. So obviously it's a Series 3. Although this particular kit is a Series 5 starter set that I'm doing an inbox review on, but it was originally released as a Series 3 Dogfight double along with the Messerschmitt BF110C and D variant. Now, I wouldn't normally build this particular kit, but this particular model is going to be released in my models to avoid like the plague, because both these two models probably constitute some of the worst renderings of the two model subjects on the market, full stop. The Spitfire is probably the second, maybe third worst Spitfire I've ever seen in 70-second scale, and the Messerschmitt 110 is probably the worst I've ever seen. We'll go into the boxing history on the two kits. We're obviously looking at the Airfix Dogfight double. The boxing history started in 1959, believe it or not, on a Type 1 header with a Series 2 Messerschmitt ME110D. These kits in the late 50s and early 60s were all released in bags from Series 1 and 2. The thing you have to remember is that from 1959 to the last release date, which I think was actually in the noughties somewhere, this mould for the ME110 was never changed at all. When this kit was released in 1959, it didn't have an awful lot of competition. There wasn't an awful lot about of an ME110. I think the next kit to be released was the Frog kit, which I think was released in the very early 60s. And to be honest with you, both of these two kits, the Airfix and the Frog kit, aren't good. But the Airfix kit is definitely worse than the Frog kit. So that's 1959, the bag kit release. And also, of course, you had the bag kit Type 2 1959 release of the Spitfire Mark 9. Notice the plastic in the bag is light blue. The colour of the plastic for the majority of the releases from the Spitfire Mark 9 were light blue, but a number of them were released, like this one that I've got here, they were released in light grey plastic. And I think the majority of the boxings after 1990 were in light grey plastic. But that's the Type 2 header for the Spitfire Mark 9. 1959 also saw a sort of an oddment. The BTK Spitfire, which was originally released, I think, in 1954, I believe, which was probably the worst Spitfire model I've ever seen of a Mark 9. Sorry, of any Mark Spitfire. It was actually a Mark 1A Spitfire that was released as BTK Spitfire, and Airfix realised how bad the mould was, and when the Mark 9 was initially released, it was also incorporated into this Type 1 header of BTK Spitfire to replace the original mould. And you can see clearly inside that packaging, although you've got an unusual stand, these were the early 1950s stands that were provided with the Airfix kits and the bag kits in those days, but you can clearly see that this is the Series 1 Spitfire Mark 9 release with the exhaust stubs, that spindly little propeller spinner. Yeah, this is definitely the Mark 9 Spitfire in Series 1. That was 1959. Also in 1959, there was a company in Germany called Plasti who produced some Airfix kits, and again they produced the BTK Spitfire, but this time it was actually released as a Spitfire Mark 9. And that was a very unusual packaging that Plasti Airfix produced. They actually built them in boxes. I think they had flip-top lids, and they were predominantly red, white and blue, with the Union Jack on the top. But this was a German company that sold Airfix kits in Germany. Quite rare. If you can actually get hold of a plastic Airfix model now, they are quite rare and they'll probably command quite a high price tag. Plasti Airfix also produced the ME110 in 1960. This is a Series 2 kit, but it's the same model that you got in the original Type 1 release in 1959. So that's the Plasti Airfix ME110. Then in 1962, you had the Type 2 release of the ME110D. The Type 1 and Type 2 boxings, well, headers are quite easy to differentiate between the two. The design layout was similar, with the number 2 series written on the right hand side and all of the information on the actual packaging header written in virtually the same way, but you had a definite 2-section windows to the top of the header, which was divided by a red line, and the image of the aircraft was superimposed over the top of the 2 windows. Usually the Type 2 header had the white section of the window on the left hand side, but this wasn't always the case. Sometimes it fell on the right hand side depending on the kit, and you can see in this image here that the actual ME110 was always released in grey plastic, and this was regimental throughout all of the offerings and all of the boxings throughout the years. 1962, that went from a Type 2 header. Then in 1962 you had the first ever red stripe release of any Airfix kit. This was the Spitfire Mark 9. You can see that the BTK Spitfire definitely was the same mould. You can see the exhaust pipes there. It's exactly the same mould, definitely. But this was the first release on a red stripe bag. Red stripe kits didn't really come into their own properly until about 1963, but the Spitfire was definitely released, I think, for Christmas 1962 on a red stripe bag label. 1962 then went to 1963 with a Type 2 new release in boxes of Series 2 kits. This was the Airfix Messerschmitt ME110D. These were the first Type 2 box releases, and they came out in 1963. So you transition from a bag kit into a box. Then in 1963, a new company came on the market. This was Airfix Corporation of America, who produced the Airfix Spitfire Mark 9 in a box for the American market. And they used a new type of artwork for the Spitfire. Unusual in that the artwork was green and brown with a yellow spinner. I don't know of any Mark 9 Spitfires that ever carried a green and brown camouflage. And the other thing that's quite interesting is the Spitfire in the background is definitely green and grey. You can see it's green and grey. But Johnny Johnson's mount was definitely green and grey and light grey underside. And the JJ prefix numbers around the roundel there is definitely Johnny Johnson's flight. Probably one of the most famous and certainly the highest enemy aircraft score rate of any British RAF or Commonwealth pilot in World War II. 1963 went to 1964, and again you have Airfix Corporation of America's release, this time of the Messerschmitt ME110D. Again, new artwork here. The ME110 appears to be escorting HE-177 bombers, which probably wouldn't have happened as late as 1944. I think a lot of the ME-110s were relinquished to night fighter duties, and this image would definitely not have been apparent. The escorts for the HE-117s would probably more likely have been FW-190s or 109 Messerschmitts. So that's 1964, Airfix Corporation of America's release of the Messerschmitt Bf-110D, leads to 1964's release from Airfix by Craftmaster. Now, again, you can clearly see that this aircraft is in a funny camouflage scheme. It looks like two-tone brown, doesn't it? But this is the same artwork that was released from Airfix Corporation of America. Now, I'm not sure 100%, maybe some of my subbers can put in the comment slip here, but Airfix Corporation of America may have been bought up or may have changed their name into Airfix by Craftmaster, which eventually became MPC. Craftmaster definitely became MPC in later years, but this was the 64 release of the Spitfire Mark 9 in that era. One of the other things that's also worthy of note is that the Craftmaster kits from Airfix were often built from inferior plastic, usually white plastic, but not always. And some of my subbers who live in America have definitely stated that the plastic is definitely inferior to the parent company Airfix and the models released in Europe. 1964 went through to 1966, and this was the first red stripe release of the Messerschmitt ME110. It's an interesting image here because you can see the original early release labelling with the Airfix 72nd scale scroll or label over the top of the red stripe release. This was later replaced by a different type of scroll label, but still in the red stripe release boxing. So that's 1966 for the ME110D. Then you had 1966 with the release of the kit that I'm actually doing an in-box review of. This was the initial release of the Spitfire Mark 9 and Messerschmitt ME110D as a dogfight double, and most of the dogfight doubles were released in about 1965 with the biplanes, and 1966 with the World War II aircraft. Some of the post-war airplanes were released later in the 60s, just after their initial release date. But these two aircraft were released originally in 1966 as a dogfight double in Series 3. Now then, 1967, Airfix by Craftmaster released the Messerschmitt ME110, again with the same artwork as Corporation of America, and I'm pretty sure Corporation of America were either bought up by Craftmaster or they were changed their name to Craftmaster. I'm not quite 100% sure, but perhaps somebody can let us know in the comments. 1967 went through to again 1967, and this was a new red stripe bag release of the Spitfire Mark 9. Now, I do remember buying the Airfix Spitfire Mark 9 at least 3 times in the past before attempting to build this one. And this was the first release of the Spitfire Mark 9 bag kit that I actually bought, and I'm pretty sure I bought it in about 1970. It was one of the kits that I dragged my mother into town, and at the tender age of about 5, and purchased a few Airfix kits because my brother built them, and this was no exception. The Spitfire Mark 9 on this style bag kit, I can definitely remember this was definitely the kit that I bought. Interesting to note also is that the early release Spitfire Mark 9 plastic kits were released in a sort of a duck egg light blue, and this is definitely a more medium sky blue. And I can't remember whether it was this colour or the other colour. It probably was this colour. I do remember it being a sort of a bluey colour plastic. So that's 1967. 1968 was the second release box red stripe release for the ME110D, and again you can see the later style Airfix 72nd scale scroll in that little box window there. The two aircraft that are attacking this ME110, believe it or not, are Hurricane Mark 1s, and I'm guessing that this image is a portrayal of an ME110 during the Battle of Britain. 1968, that's a red stripe release. And then in 1971, MPC came on the market, and I'm pretty sure that MPC, I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but I'm pretty sure it's called Model Product Craftmaster. I'm pretty sure that's what they're called, but don't quote me 100% because it's something I remember seeing in research here and there. But the MPC initial release in 1971 incorporated 3 completely different Spitfire Mark 9s. And again, you can see the one on the top there is in 2-tone brown camouflage. And then you have the regular green and grey camouflage scheme. And then there's an American variant, which is released in 2-tone brown camouflage. And I'm trying to see where these aircraft are actually based. The top one, JAK, is a Northolt-based aircraft in June 1941. That would have been an initial release of the Spitfire Mark 9. The middle one is of a Slovak unit. That's a Czechoslovakian. You see the symbol just below the cockpit canopy there, the Czech symbol, based in 1944 in the UK. And the other aircraft is from an American 67th Observation Group in March 1943. Doesn't state where they're based, but probably somewhere in the Pacific. The Spitfire was one of the few aircraft that were sold to America that were British designs. I think there were only about 7 aircraft in the history of British designed aircraft where the aeroplane was sold to America. The Mosquito and the Spitfire, I think, were the two sold during World War II. That's 1971. Then you go to 1973 and you have the first Type 4 release in the Dogfight double range of the ME110D and Spitfire Mark 9. I remember my brother buying this kit, and I remember him building the ME110. And it's an interesting thing because I've never built the Airfix ME110, but I've built the Spitfire about at least three times. Once more recently than you'd know. It was on a slideshow in one of my Model World slideshows. So that's 1973, the Type 4 box. And then you go to 1973 with the first Type 4, I think this is a Type 4C blister pack of the Spitfire Mark 9. I do remember getting this kit as well, but it was later in the 70s. I think I bought this kit on a blister pack. And I don't remember buying it in a box up until more recently. But the Spitfire Mark 9 was one of the first kits released in a blister pack. And these kits were released in about 1973 initially. Interesting to note the transfers that you get in this particular kit. And I want you to make a mental note of those because they constitute 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 markings on the entire decal sheet. The more modern release kits, you had a more comprehensive decal sheet. And if you do really want to build this particular kit for nostalgic reasons, try and get a later boxing. You'll have more decals and you'll get a better result from it. 1973 with the blister pack Type 4C goes through to 1974, and model product Craftmaster again released a kit of the Messerschmitt ME110, this time with 6 crew members. They're all ground crew members. There's no pilots. The pilots came originally with a kit anyway, but this gives you an idea of what this kit builds up and looks like. And I'm telling you now, the exhaust stubs that he's got on this particular model, he's definitely cut down, because the exhaust stubs in the model are a lot longer than that. That might be something I might do, cut the exhaust stubs down. It looks a bit better. But this was the only model release of the ME110 from Airfix that came with 6 ground crew figures. So that's quite interesting. 1974. 1975, you have the first Type 4 boxing of the ME110. Again, the same artwork originally. And that kit, I do remember being on the shelves quite commonly. And they're getting quite collectible now. They're quite a collectible size box because they're quite small still. So that's 1975. You go through to 1976 and you have the second release in the Type 4 box. This time the Airfix logo colour has changed to yellow as opposed to red from the previous one. But it's basically the same kit, the same box, the same everything. Everything's virtually identical. And that was 1976. Then you go into 1976 with the Type 4 boxing of the Spitfire Mark 9. Now, in 1976, Airfix went over to take all of the bag and blister pack card kits, if you like, off the market and replace them in boxes. And the 1976 was about the date this happened. Again, you've got the same artwork, but these boxes are actually quite small. They weren't as big as a blister pack even. They were about the same width, but they were about the same size as the blister part of the packet on the blister pack packaging. So again, they're quite collectible now. There's not very many of these on the market now, but 1976 was when everything went over to boxes. 1976 was also the next release of the Dogfight Double, this time in a Type 6 box. You can tell a Type 6 box because it has Spitfire and ME110 blazoned over the top of the image with black writing identifying some information about either the model or the aircraft subjects. And the black writing is in Dogfight Double, so it definitely constitutes this kit as being a Type 6 box. Sorry, a Type 5 box. Sorry, not a Type 6, a Type 5 box. Type 6 box is totally different altogether. So that's 1976, Dogfight Double of the Spitfire and ME110D. Then you go into 1978 and you have what's called the Type 6 box. This is what I often refer to as the planetoid logo boxings. Again, it retains the same image and artwork of previous releases, but you have no border window on the lower section of the box, and the logo of the Airfix logo itself is in black, white, and red, and it actually has a planetoid sort of form to it, not being a complete sphere. And I really like this style of boxing. I always thought they were quite unique, and they differed from all of the other boxings you could possibly imagine because of that label shape. Logo is very, very nice. 1978 went through to 1984. This is where Mattel Incorporated had hold of Airfix as a company, and Mattel, their marketing company was Palitoy, and they released all of their aircraft kits on what were called blueprint style boxings, where the aircraft model subject was made up on top of a blueprint, and then it showed you exactly what you got in the kit. And you can see the exhaust stubs there, they're a lot bigger than what they were on the MPC boxing. And to look at this image of this kit made up, it doesn't look that bad, but when you think this kit's been manufactured and fabricated by a professional for the Airfix company as marketing for their main box work, you can see the ill-fitting canopy here. You can see the bulbous extra section to the nose cone. As you can see, it is slightly wider than the front section of the fuselage. And the other thing you can see is that the propeller spinners aren't the right shape. They just look decidedly not quite right. And these are the main issues with this particular model. These are the main issues, and hopefully I can elaborate on that when the build progress video goes up. So that's 1984. 1989 came the first release boxings from Humbrol Group, when the company was owned by who owned this company at that time? I think it was Humbrol Group, actually. Humbrol Group. They marketed Airfix kits for the parent company. I can't remember what the parent company was called now. But this style of boxing came under the heading of Type 7 boxings, I believe, and they were the Hella style window frame format, where the image of the aircraft, and they changed the image, the artwork of the aircraft. You can see it's facing the other way. But the aircraft were built in special edition boxings to commemorate aircraft of the aces, and this, of course, is Johnny Johnson's Flight JEJ. That was 1989, and then in 1990 there was a company called Lodella, who I think were a marketing company for South America. I'm pretty sure they were a South American marketing company, and they got hold of quite a lot of the Airfix kits. You can see here you've got the Dogfight double of the Supermarine Spitfire Mark 9 and the Messerschmitt BF-110C and D, but below it you've also got a Messerschmitt ME-262, and I think that kit came with a de Havilland Mosquito in the Dogfight double. That was released by Lodella as well, obviously in the same era. But that was 1990. Then in 1995 you had another collection set from Airfix. This is the Historic Aircraft Collection Set, and this comprises a Spitfire Mark 9, you can see there, a Messerschmitt 262A, and a P-51D Mustang. The interesting thing about this particular set, it's a VE Day commemorative set, obviously 50 years after VE Day, is that the two kits on the top were Series 1 kits, and the kit on the bottom was a Series 2 kit, and you actually got proper enamel paints, and a decent tube and a decent brush. And this set, this was probably one of the last sets where they used proper, this era about 1995-96 was the last time when Airfix released kits in build sets and starter sets where they used enamel paints rather than going over to those god-awful Humbrol and Airfix acrylic paints, which aren't really very good. So that's 1995, that release set. And then in 1997, you had this Dogfight double release of the Spitfire Mark 9 and the Messerschmitt BF-110C/D. Sorry about the image, it's not fantastic, but you can see immediately in 1997 these paints have been replaced with these acrylic paints. Everything else in the box is quite nice. These brushes are fantastic. The glue, if you use tubes, the glue is perfectly adequate, no problems whatsoever. But these issue boxes, they released quite a lot of models in this style of box as a starter set. Not just aircraft, they released ships. They also released combat sets as well in this style of boxings, and they were quite popular in 1997. Then in 1998 came probably one of Heller's last boxing releasings before you got the silver swirl at the bottom of the packaging, and these carried a skill level chart, and the ME110 is supposedly a skill level 2. I would be surprised if even a novice builder who'd never built this kit or never built any models before couldn't build the Airfix 110 C or D. It's not a difficult or demanding model to build. And interesting again here is that you've got this image which carried over from the Red Stripe days when this kit was released as a Red Stripe box back in 1967, I believe. So that's 1998. That goes through to another release by a company called SK Models, who actually released the Airfix ME110 C and D. Airfix reboxed kit, and don't know who SK Models are, don't know an awful lot about them. But I'm guessing they're an Eastern European or possibly a Russian company. And they've got their hands on a real gem, haven't they? So that's 1998 with the ME110 C or D from SK Models. Then in 1998, you got one of the last boxings. This is skill level 1 of the Supermarine Spitfire Mark 9, and that was released in 1998, same year as the ME110. And then in 1999, you got the Lodella, the final release from Lodella of the Dogfight double Spitfire Mark 9 and ME1 BF110 C and D. I think this is actually a carbon copy of the original boxings, but they re-released this kit in 1999, I think, for the Millennium. So we go from 1999 to the Airfix release of the same year, and this is actually the boxing that I've got a copy of. The set does include all of those god-awful acrylic paints, and it does include a Humbrol poly cement and 2 brushes, and it's quite a nice set actually, apart from those paints, in terms of the actual starter set accessories that you get, but the 2 kits inside are pretty dire. So that's 1999. Then you go into 1999 when Airfix also released this kit under the standard boxings without a starter set. And again, it's marked skill level 2. I would suggest that this kit could be marked as a skill level 1. There's nothing taxing about that ME110 kit at all. I've had a look through the instructions, and it's not taxing in any way, shape or form. Perhaps they think it's just slightly more demanding than Spitfire, and that probably is true, because the Spitfire could almost throw itself together. 1999 goes through to 2005, and I think this is the last image unboxing of the Spitfire Mark 9 in its original format in 2005. That also goes through to the retooling of the Spitfire Mark 9. This is the Spitfire Mark 9C. And I've also got this kit in my stash as well, and I'm quite looking forward to building this. But the retooled Spitfire Mark 9 is one of the better models of a Mark 9 Spitfire on the market today, and it is highly recommended by all pro builders, not just myself, but all the pro builders and reviewers. And it's quite easily obtainable. You can usually get this kit quite easily in second-hand market, and also on the shelves of your local model shop. And this kit was retooled and released in 2009. There's also a retool and release of the Messerschmitt BF110 C2 and C4, but you can also get a D. I'm not quite sure. Can you get a B as well in an Airfix kit? Not quite sure 100%. But this kit was retooled in 2010. Now, the interesting thing about this particular kit is that it's also been released as a Dogfight double, and I'm not sure whether I've got the image. No, I haven't. It's also been released as a Dogfight double with the I think it's the Spitfire Mark 9C and the ME110, but don't quote me 100%. But I've got the information on the Gump that I'll read off about the kit in particular. But there's a nice image here of a Messerschmitt BF110 C2 Zerstorer. This would have been what they looked like during the Battle of Britain. They were quite a menacing looking aircraft, but unfortunately they had no manoeuvrability whatsoever. They were very poorly and inadequately defensively armed, and they fell very easy victims to Allied fighters during the Battle of Britain. But they scored a number of notable successes in the French campaign, and especially in the Polish campaign, where they rung up quite a lot of tallies. So what I'll do quickly, first of all, we'll just pan the camera around very quickly to the model subject I've got here. I'm hoping, there we go. It's quite easy, isn't it? There we go. So it shouldn't be too difficult to do that. Just a quick recap, the Dogfight double retool kit is actually the Spitfire Mark 1A and a BF-110 Dogfight double set, and that's retooled in the Hornby Airfix Productions marketing red boxes. So we'll just give you an idea, and this is the box artwork on the front here. This box artwork hasn't changed from the early days when it was released as a red stripe kit back in 1966. And you can see the Spitfire Johnny Johnson there's flown very close to that ME-110, hasn't he? To get the attack on the engine there quite nicely. You've got an image there on the back of the two kits made up. You do get this display stand in this model, which is quite nice, and you also get an alternative set of markings for the ME-110, but there's only one variant available for the Spitfire. So it's actually quite a comprehensive kit, complete with a stand. That's quite nice. I quite like that. So what we'll do first of all, we'll just put that box down there, and I'll put this down here. Before we go into the main guts of the kit, these are the paints that you get, and the poly cement. There's two brushes in there, a fine brush and a medium brush, what I call. And these Airfix paints from this era were dreadful. I'm going to be honest with you, but the Airfix acrylic paints that you get in the Hornby releases tend to be a lot better than these, but these are pretty terrible, and I would only really use these to paint detail, interior and stuff like that. I wouldn't try and get a non-grained, nice smooth image for an exterior camo pattern on an aircraft, even a small aircraft of this size. I don't think it's even worth trying to do that. Just put the plans to one side. This is the display stand you get with the kit. It's quite sizable. There's my hand over the top. It's quite a sizable stand. You've got a nice little plaque image here, which I think you'll be able to put... there'll be something in there that you can put Messerschmitt and Spitfire in. And there's quite a few parts to this stand. It's quite a comprehensive stand, as you can see. Quite like the look of that. That looks quite nice. And there's three positions here that you can put stuff into, which again is quite nice, isn't it? So that's quite a nice comprehensive stand. Quite like that. I'll have a look at those in a minute. You also get an Airfix Club pamphlet. Now, I can remember when I had the ability to join the Airfix Club, the Airfix Modelers Club, when I was a kid. I think it was 50 pence a year, or you could pay 5 pence monthly on a subscription, and you got a magazine and some tokens and stuff if you paid the premium rate, which I think was 10 pence a month and £1 a year. And you got a Christmas, you got a birthday present. I'm pretty sure you got a birthday present as well. And this is the membership application form, and there's the address. That address doesn't exist anymore, by the way. The Melton Mowbray address doesn't exist. But as you can see, even in the 90s, it was 15 quid per year. But you did receive an Airfix kit exclusive to the club members, an exclusive Airfix Club badge, Flying Owls passport, Airfix Collector's Badge of the Year, the latest Airfix catalogue, and a quarterly club magazine where you can enter club competitions, you can win prizes with model reviews, model builds, and be the first to hear of all about the Airfix news. So the club definitely had its advantages, but I still think it was pretty expensive. You could have got the postal version for £22.99. I still think that's quite a lot. for that, but that just an interesting piece of gump really. Right, the instruction leaflet. This is not going to take very long to go through. The instruction leaflet is A4. It has a look of, I've been photocopied about it, and it incorporates both aircraft, obviously, because they're both in the kit, and you can see the serial number there, A536. That's the serial number of the Dogfight double kit on this release. But basically, on the inside you've got some general instructions in different languages, and then you've got some assembly icons, quite easy to explain, safety instructions in different languages, basically teaching your granny how to suck eggs, isn't it? And then you get to the main body of the actual aircraft itself. The Spitfire builds up in 4 parts, and there's a paint guide on a 5th section. And there's not a lot of parts to the Spitfire Mark 9, I'll be honest with you. There's very little detail inside. Johnny Johnson just sits in the seat and then he goes inside the fuselage halves. You've got a rotating propeller, and this is one of the first drawbacks that I find with the Airfix Spitfire Mark 9 that was a Series 1 kit, is that the wings are one part and they just glue into the 2 apertures on the side of the fuselage. Now, a lot of people don't have an issue with this, but I certainly do, because the lower wing on every Spitfire that was ever built was built in one piece, and the upper wing halves were built on top of the wing centre section and then bolted through the main spar, and the wing actually clipped into the underside of the fuselage as a one-piece section. And if you build Spitfires with 2 separate wings, bearing in mind the Frog kit is exactly the same as this, there are a number of other kits as well that were from this era that have this style of wing construction. They never give you a decent result. They're never going to be as good as the single piece under section wing, tip to tip. It's always going to be a better result. But basically section 2 you're building the airframe and the propeller and putting Johnny into the seat quite easily, and then in section 3 you're putting the tail wheel, the canopy and the aerial mast into position. I never put canopies into my aircraft before they're painted. I always put them in as an afterthought. And there's another thing about this kit that I don't like, is it has moulded exhaust pipes. So painting them is going to be a little bit of a chore compared to having them separate. Section 4, you're basically just finishing the touches to the undersection, the undercarriage legs there and the main radiators, which is quite okay as well. And also the oil cooler there is built in 2 halves as part of the fuselage halves, so that's going to be fun as well. We'll just show you the paint plan. The paint plan on this kit is quite comprehensive. It's certainly a lot more comprehensive than you got on the earlier releases. It does show you where everything goes. On the top you've got Johnny Johnson's Decal's EN398 is actually one of his aircraft that he flew in about 1944 as squadron leader of the Royal Canadian Air Force, and again I'll explain all about that in the gump when we get through to it. You've got walking ways there on the decal sheet, which you didn't have on the earlier releases. You can see straight away there are quite a number of decals that you just did not get on the earlier releases. It's the underside view there. Again, you've got more trestle marks, bits and bobs going on, and then you've got the starboard side of the fuselage there as well, which is quite nice. So it's quite a comprehensive paint guide. It states there's only 4 colours, which is interesting. 64 is the light aircraft grey for the underside. 106 is the camo pattern grey for the top surfaces. Matte 30 is of course matte 30 green, and matte 90 is the band that goes on the fuselage sides, where the EN398, can you see the band on the fuselage sides there? Where EN398 goes into place, you'll have to paint that band onto the kit. I'm pretty sure it's not on the decal sheet. No, it's not. So that's quite easily. And then this is where the Airfix plans sort of come quite interesting, because originally you had this as your front page, but you can also have it as that as your front page, where you've got the Messerschmitt BF110 C and D. And then again, you've got some gumph about the information on the aircraft, just like you had with the Spitfire. All the safety instructions are all as before with the Spitfire, so you don't need to put that in again. But the ME110 builds up in, again, 3 steps, although one of the steps is actually split into 2, depending on whether you want the aircraft with wheels up or wheels down. But anyway, we'll just quickly go through the plans on this because there's not an awful lot to go through. Both these kits don't have that many parts. The section 1, you're basically building the entire airframe. And this is unusual because you're not putting the figures into the seats prior to putting the airframe together. And there's a reason for this. The aperture of the cockpit canopy is actually huge. It's big enough for you to put the pilots in as an afterthought in the last section, and that's how Airfix tell you to put them in. But basically the airframe goes together and the engines and the propellers are retained into the engine cowlings there, and all goes together as an airframe assembly basically. And they're telling you to paint the interior 64 and 91 mix. But to be honest with you, I've always found that the grey primer that Humble use, which is matte 1, is actually a pretty good close resemblance of Luftwaffe etch for the interior of the Second World War aircraft. So that's probably the colour I'll be using. Then in section 2, you're basically putting the undercarriage in the lowered position into place. The exhaust pipes, note the exhaust pipes go in opposing directions on each side of the cowlings. So the inner ones will face down and the outer ones will face up. This was common of all ME110s, even the later G variants. And then you've got the the radiator covers there, and the drop tanks on the wings, which you can put those into place as well. But the drop tanks are only used on the BF110 variant, so you'll have to open the holes up in this section if you want to build the 110 variant. The 110D variant. Sorry. Don't think I'm with it. The alternative section 2 is to just build the plane with wheels up, where you just close all the doors. Quite easy. And then in section 3, the pilots don't even have pilot seats. You just expected to put them onto those locating pins. Now, I might be tempted to build some seats. I don't think it's going to be that difficult to build some seats. Or even a floor pan for this kit. I wouldn't have thought it would be that hard. We'll decide later. And then you put the nose section on, canopy section, the rear gunner and the tail wheel in place, and that finishes all the fittings basically. And that's section 3, kit ready for paint. And then you get 2 different variants that you can build from this kit. You can build a French campaign ME110C C5 variant, and that's this one. The colours recommended are matte 145, matte 64 and 65 for the underside, I believe, and matte 27, which is a dark sea grey, for the upper surface's camouflage pattern. And you can see them there; they're quite okay. Now the early decals that you got with early releases of the ME110 from Airfix, they were pretty. There wasn't an awful lot in the decal sheet. But the decal sheet that you get with this particular kit and later releases is actually quite comprehensive, and they've even got filler caps there for the fuel tanks that are in the wings, which is quite nice. There's lots of other stencils hanging around here and there as well, which is great. You can also build a D variant from 1942. I think this is an Italian campaign variant, and again you're painting one colour from 2 different colours. But there'll probably be an equivalent in different colours ranges, different companies' ranges, and then you paint in the underside matte 65, which is the standard Luftwaffe blue. Quite easy, really. I could be tempted to build this particular variant because I don't think a Mark 9 Spitfire would have come across a C5 variant of the ME110. I don't think the Mark 9 Spitfire was released until about 1942, but that's basically the plans for the Dogfight double set for the Spitfire and the ME110. Not a lot going on there. Then we'll have a look at the decals. Now the decals on this particular kit are quite nice. There's the Spitfire decals. Do you remember seeing the decal sheet that you got with that earlier release kit of the Spitfire Mark 9? The decal sheet didn't look anything like that, did it? Only had 12 decals on it. And the other interesting thing is that the JEJ mount of Johnny Johnson was flown during his time as squadron commander with a Royal Canadian Air Force unit. And so you've got the proper Canadian Air Force flashes, which is quite nice. And there's a few stencils there as well. And then you've got the German markings for the ME110, and you can see the stencils under there, and there's a few other little bits and bobs going on. They're quite crisply rendered decals. They're very, very nice. There's no backing film that's yellowed. It's a nice decal sheet, quite nice indeed. And I'm feeling these decals, and yeah, they're a little bit raised. But these were made in the days before cartograph, of course. But as a decal sheet goes, yeah, I'm quite happy with that. That looks okay. Quite happy with that indeed. Now then, now to the guts of the reason why I think this kit should be in the models to avoid like a plague. To avoid like the plague. Let's start with the Spitfire first. This will be quite easy. Just open the bag, we'll get the parts out. Start off with the transparency, because people like to see the transparency. Although I don't know what you're going to make of the transparency in this kit, because it ain't great. Here's the transparency for this model. What do you think of that? That's pretty dire. It hasn't got a bulletproof windscreen on the front, it's just a flat plate. It's not a terribly bulbous canopy either. Should have been a lot more bulbous than that. It's a little bit decidedly flat. It's reasonably clear. I mean, you know, don't get me wrong, it's reasonably clear. But it's not great, is it? It's not a good canopy. I'm not that impressed with that. Probably our aftermarket parts hanging around here. I'll just put this wheel back in because there's another one on sprue here somewhere. We'll do the small sprue here. This is one of the issues I have with this particular kit, is the wings. Now, the wings themselves, they're not too badly formed. And don't get me wrong, when you put the airframe together, the airframe isn't that badly formed. It's not a bad render of the airframe. But when you turn the aircraft upside down and the aircraft's built, you'll see exactly what I mean. The wheel wells on this particular kit are completely bland, of any form of detail whatsoever. But then I'd expect that with the release date of this kit being in the late 50s. There's quite a lot of flash on this kit as well, but I am quite surprised about the amount of panel lines on this kit, and the fact that they don't appear to be too overdone. And that is a little bit surprising. The aluminium ailerons and flaps there that are covered in fabric, they're quite nicely rendered too. And although they're raised, yeah, they are raised. You'd expect them to be raised. They're quite pronounced, so we'll need sanding down a little bit. But they're quite nicely rendered. I quite like them. And you've got the blisters there at the back of the cannon mounts, just above the main cannon access panels. And again, you've got that aluminium covered aileron on the top there. You can see it clear as a bell. It's quite nicely rendered, but the wings will need a little bit of sanding down because they're quite pronounced. We'll have a quick look at this sprue next. Now the pilot figure in this sprue looks like he's been shot in the chest by a cannon, and I think he's going to have to be, something's going to have to be done about him, because he looks like he needs to go to A&E. The tail planes, again, they've got quite nice raised panel lines, so we'll need sanding down a little bit, but the elevators seem to be quite nicely rendered as well. Undercarriage legs don't seem to be too bad. The propeller, not sure about the propeller. There's one of the tyres. The tyres on this kit rotate, and there's that god-awful spinner. The spinner, there's a bit of abnormality mould in there as well. That's going to have to be filled. And the spinner itself is actually far too spindly. It's too narrow. It needs to be bowled out a little bit, which is a shame. And it's one of the key things that's wrong with this kit, is the spinner on the propeller makes the kit look terrible. Interior of the fuselage, yeah, well, not much there, is there? Exterior of the fuselage, we'll put that down in a minute because I want to put the two together to show you what it looks like. Exterior of the fuselage, you can see those exhaust stubs are massive, aren't they? They are actually too big. And that's another fault with this particular kit. But the actual rendered raised panel lines, they're actually not too bad. Need a little bit of sanding down, but they're not too bad. And then I'll put these two fuselage halves together so you can see what it looks like. Because the overall outline of the actual airframe is not that bad. It doesn't look too bad. And that oil cooler will, although it's not going to line up properly, it will fill in and sand down quite nicely. It's not a terrible fitting kit, it fits quite nicely. That's the parts on the Spitfire. I'll just do the boring bit and putting these bits back together again, because back in the bag, because I don't want to lose any of these bits. Trying to get replacement parts out of Airfix for this kit, I would have thought it's pretty much darn near impossible. So that's the Spitfire. Now we'll have a look at the ME110. And this is where you're going to have to promise you're not going to laugh. Just take that out there. Put all of that. Into there. Put all of that into there. There we go. Now then, here we go. I'll show you the transparency first, because everyone likes to look at the transparency. Now, the transparency on this kit does look a bit better than the Spitfire's transparency in terms of its clarity. The framework doesn't look to be too bad, but I'm telling you now, you're going to have to do a little bit of work with the front of that canopy, because that is half of the join problem with this canopy. You need to do a little bit of work with that to get it to fit flushly, and to get the rest of the canopy to fit flushly. Otherwise it's going to look like a dog's body, but it's quite a clear piece of plastic, so that's not too bad. Don't think you're going to have an issue with that. Put that away. Then there's two drop tanks. Again, you don't need to see those because they're on the sprue. You don't. Those two halves are no problem. And we've got a propeller here, which again you won't need to see because you'll see it on the sprue in a minute. So let's just get all that out of the way and pack it away. Got a tail plane here. It's a one-piece part, which is a problem because when you turn it over, you've got two lovely sinkholes there, haven't you? And the detail, again, the raised rivet line on this kit doesn't look too bad. Not a lot of flash on that part either. There's a little tiny bit on the rear edge, but very little. But the actual detailing and the actual line detailing on these two kits isn't too bad. With a little bit of filing down, I think they'll be okay. Now then, what should we have a look at first? Right, let's have a look at this sprue. First of all, I think I've got a bit missing, unless it's in here somewhere. There's an exhaust stub missing, I think. Oh no, it's in the bottom of there, that's alright, you don't need to worry about that. Right, engine cowlings. The engine cowlings on this kit are pretty dire. They're not great, they're not a fabulous shape. Exhaust stubs there, they're quite thick, quite long. Undercarriage oleos there are quite long and spindly. Undercarriage doors look pretty dire. The tail planes, they're not too bad. They could have been worse. Again, they're built in one piece, so you've got massive sinkholes on the inside edges of the tail planes on both sides. The drop tanks, they're okay, they're not too bad. Main undercarriage wheels, they don't look too bad either, do they? Yeah, not bad. Then you have the pilot figures. Now the pilot figures on this particular kit are a lot smaller than the pilot figure in the Spitfire, which makes me wonder whether these two guys are either semi-midgets or they're a different scale. They look about 1/75th, I would say. They're definitely smaller than the Spitfire's pilot, which is interesting. And then you've got this ill-shaped propeller spinner on the ME110. Now I've looked at loads of pictures of an ME110 and the prop spinner looks nothing like that. The only thing that's the same is that it has a blunt top. The very forward section is definitely blunted down, but the rest of it doesn't even look like that. And the nose cone, yeah, just a big lump of plastic, isn't it? We'll see how it goes together. It might go together all right, you never know. Now then, I'll just show you one underside, because everything else is the same, but the underside of the wing there is quite nicely panel lined. It's not too drastic. The aileron there doesn't look too badly moulded either. And all the sinkholes are on the inside, which is nice. So that's the wing. Don't need to show you the fuselage, because the fuselage is also on this side. Then you've got the upper section of the wing. Again, the detail on it isn't too bad. It's quite nicely cast. The aileron doesn't look too badly moulded either. And the raised panel lines are apparent, but they're not too bad. They're not too bad at all. And the fuselage is actually quite bereft of rivets, which is quite correct, because the ME110 was flush riveted. The ME110 was actually incredibly well built, as most German aircraft were, but the ME110 was very, very well built. There are lots of surface rivets here and there, but you can't really see them very well, can you? I can feel the surface rivets, so they probably won't need sanding down at all. The interior detail on this kit is pretty dire. Again, you're expected to just glue the pilots onto those locating pins, and that's the extent of the interior detail. That's pretty diabolical. So anyway, that's the parts on this particular model. I think you'll agree with me, they're not an awful lot to write home about. Not an awful lot to write home about at all. But the proof is going to be in, as I say, the proof is going to be in the pudding, isn't it? For some reason this won't go back in the box. Let me just I think what I've got to do is I've got to turn these around. Sorry about this, guys. I normally get all this sorted out, but it doesn't seem to want to play ball. Oh, I think it's play ball now. There we go. So let's just put the stand back in and the paints and all that garbage. Put all that back together, and then put the box back together, and then I can read you the gump on this particular kit because it's quite interesting. Right. Oh. Oh, you're joking. Doesn't want to go back in there for some reason. There we go. So there's the box. We'll have a quick look at that whilst we're going through this gump. Now then. The model we're doing an in-box review on is the Airfix Messerschmitt Bf 110C or D and the Supermarine Spitfire Mark 9. The initial release date was 1966 for the Dogfight Double, but both the models were originally released as individual kits in 1959. The kits are moulded in 1/72nd scale, and the model that I'm doing an in-box review on is serial numbered A50036. Now, there are decals for one version of the Spitfire, the Mark 9 EN398, which is JEJ, Wing Commander Johnny Johnson of 144th Royal Canadian Air Force in 1944. And there are two versions for the BF 110, a Bf-110C5 of 4F Aufklärungsgruppe 14, German Luftwaffe based in Cherbourg in France during July 1940, and a Bf-110D of 8 Staffel 3 Grouper, Zerstörer-Gruppe ZG-26, Horst Vassal Group from the German Luftwaffe based at Trapani in Sicily in 1942. The dimensions of the kits are for the Spitfire 5.5 inches long by 6 inches span by about 1.5 inches high on its undercarriage, and the Bf-110 will be about 6.5 inches long by a 9-inch wingspan and about 1.75 inches high on its undercarriage. There are 21 parts on 2 grey plastic sprues and 1 clear part, making 22 parts in total for the Spitfire, and 44 parts on 3 grey plastic sprues and 1 clear part, making 45 parts total for the ME-110. Options and costs. Now, I have mentioned options and costs for the Spitfire Mark 9 when I did the Matchbox in-box review, but for those people who haven't seen that video, all the options and costs relate to 1/72 scale releases. Now, for the Spitfire Mark 9, AMT did a Mark 9 Spitfire which retails about £8 to £10. AZ Models do a Spitfire Mark 9, a T Mark 9, a Mark 9C, a Mark 9E, an LF Mark 9E, a Mark 9 UTI, and a Mark 9 Floatfire, and a T Mark 9, retailing for between £9 and £17. Airfix did a Spitfire Mark 9, this is the original tooling, which retails for anything between £3 and £16. And Airfix also did the Mark 9 and Messerschmitt Bf-110D Dogfight double kit, which retails for about £5 to £21. Airfix also did a historic collection of the Spitfire Mark 9, the P-51D Mustang and the Messerschmitt ME-262A. This kit is retailing anything between £14.50 and £25. And Airfix also released a new tool of a Spitfire Mark 9C, and this kit can be bought for anything between £4 and £13. Bynec did a Spitfire Mark 9, a Mark 9C and a Mark 9E, which I think is an Italieri repop, and that kit is available for anything, well, it's about £6 actually. Brengun did a Spitfire Mark 9 and a Mark 9B, a Mark 9C and a Mark 9E, retailing for about £8 in different boxings. And Checkmaster Resin did a Spitfire Mark 9C, an F Mark 9, an F Mark 9E, an LF Mark 9E, and a T Mark 9 for about £18 to £32, all in different boxings. Edward did a really nice Spitfire F Mark 9, an F Mark 9C, an F Mark 9C, sorry, a Mark 9C, an F Mark 9C, and a Mark 9E. All these kits retail between £13 and £25. Historic did a Spitfire Mark 8/9, no prices for that. F-Toys did a Spitfire Mark 9, no pricings for that. And Frog also did a Spitfire Mark 8 or 9, which retails for anything between £5.50 and £9. Forces of Valor did a Spitfire Mark 9, which is highly rated by the professional builders, and that kit retails between £7 and £29. Hasegawa also did a Spitfire Mark 9 and a Mark 9C. Again, I've got no pricings available for that, but it will probably retail for between £10 and £20. And again, that has a 3-star rating from the pro builders. Intech do a Spitfire Mark 8 and 9, which retails for £15 to £25. Intech Mod do a Spitfire F Mark 9E and an LF Mark 9E. No pricings available on that. Italieri did a Spitfire Mark 9, which retails for anything between £1 and £10. Again, that's highly rated by the pro builders. Jay's Models do a Spitfire Mark 8 and 9 for about, got no pricings on that. Kova Savodi Prestigove or KP Models also did a Spitfire Mark 9C, an LF Mark 9C, a Mark 9E and an LF Mark 9E, anything retailing between £1 and £16 for those. Copro did a Spitfire Mark 9C for between £5 and £10. And Matchbox did a Spitfire Mark 9 and a Mark 9 and 16, two separate boxings. They're available for anything between £2 and £17.50. Platts do a Spitfire Mark 9 and Mark 16, no retail prices for that. Sword did a Spitfire LF Mark 9E, £18 for that, and that's highly praised by the pro builders. And Ventura Publications did a Spitfire Mark 9 and a Mark 9C. Again, no pricings for those. Now then, the Mark 9 Spitfires have been re-popped several times. The original Airfix Mark 9 Spitfire was produced by Airfix of Craftmaster as a Spitfire Mark 9, no pricings for that. So I've got no pricings for the two Copro kits either. These are both Copro original kits. There's Copro Air Molds to the Spitfire Mark 9 beer barrel delivery plane and a Mark 9 Floatfire, as well as an LF Mark 9E. And Copro Mastercraft did a Spitfire Mark 9C and an LF Mark 9E. No pricings for those. Lotnia Spitfires Mark 9 and Mark 9 UTI, which is a reboxed matchbox kit. Pricings between £15 and £16. MBC Models did a Spitfire LF Mark 9, which is a KP Models kit. No pricings for that. MPC did a Spitfire Mark 9, which is the Airfix Repop Series 1 kit. No pricings available on that. Mia did a Spitfire Mark 8 and 9, which is the X-Frog kit. No pricings on that. Mr. Craft did a Spitfire Mark 9C, which is a KP Models repop, for about £8. Plasti Airfix did a Spitfire Mark 9, which is the Airfix kit original release. No pricings on that. Remus Play Kits did a Spitfire Mark 8 and 9, which is the Frog kit. No pricings on that. Walterson's did a Spitfire Mark 9, which is the Forces of Valor kit. Highly praised by the pro builders. No pricings on that though. And ZTS Plastic did a Spitfire LF Mark 9E, which is a KP Models kit. No pricings on that. Now then, the options, sorry about that. The options available for the ME110 are a little bit less abundant, but they are quite interesting. Now, the original release Airfix BF110C and D retails for anything between £7 and £20. The new tool BF110C or E retails between £5 and £18. And that is highly praised by the pro builders. The Airfix Spitfire Mark 1A and BF110 Dogfight double kit, these are both new tool models. That kit released for about £5 to £30, and Edouard do a really nice BF110C, D, E, F or G, all in different boxings for between £9 and £17. Frog built a rather terrible BF110G for about £8 to £22, and Fujimi also released a half-decent BF110C and D for about £8 to £20. High Plains models do a BF110G for about £12 to £16. Hobby Boss do a BF110, which is an average kit, for about £7 to £18. Italieri do a BF110C, D, G and R variants for about £5 to £25. They're not too bad either. And LF Models built a BF110A and B. No pricings available on that, but I'm guessing they're going to be quite dear because they're actually praised by the pro builders too. Matchbox also built a BF110 for between £5 and £33, and Monogram built a BF110E for about £9 to £27. Now these kits have been reboxed by other companies. Airfix Corporation of America did a BF110D, which is the old tool Airfix kit. No pricings on that. Airfix by Craftmaster did a BF110D, which is the old tool Airfix kit. No pricings on that. Bilek did a BF110G/R, which is the Italieri kit, £8 to £12. Hasegawa did a BF110 Monogram kit, which no details on that. They also produced the Frog kit as a BF110G. No pricings available on that. The old tool Airfix kit was repopped by MPC as a BF110. No pricings on that. And of course, Plasti Airfix did a BF110D, which was the old tool Airfix kit. No pricings on that. Revell also built a BF110E, which is the old Monogram kit, for about £3 to £16. And Revell also produced the BF110G, which is the old Frog kit. Please be aware that it's the old Frog kit, for about £6 to £22. SK Models released the BF110D, which was the old tool Airfix kit. No pricings available on that. And Tamiya also repopped to the BF110E, which is the old Italieri kit. No pricings available on that. Conclusions. Well, it's simple really, just avoid both these kits like the plague as much as you can. The Spitfire is one of the worst Spitfire models on the market, and the BF110 probably is the worst 110 on the market. The Spit's propeller is too spindly and the exhaust stubs are far too big. the BF110's canopy is atrocious and the forward nose comb is too big. If you really want to get one of these kits to build for nostalgic reasons, get a later boxing, as the decals will be much better. But honestly, you're much better off getting the new toolkits in both cases, as they were updated and are far better options. Kits worthy of note for the Spitfire are the new tool Mark 9 from Airfix and the Edouard, Italeri and the Forces of Valour models, as these kits receive high praise from the pro community. And for the BF110, again the new toolkit from Airfix and the Edouard, Fujimi and Matchbox kits, as these too get quite a lot of praise from the pro builders and the reviewers. I hope this video has been of some use. Thanks for tuning in, and if you've got any questions, queries, any comments whatsoever, just put them in the comments slip. I'll try and get back to you as quickly as possible. Hope all your modelling projects are running well, and thanks for viewing. See you for the next one. Bye bye.